The experiment that changed everything. Dr. Alan Reed sat in his small underground lab, staring at the glowing blue liquid inside a glass vial. This was it, the love serum he had worked on for years, a formula that could make someone fall in love for exactly 72 hours. After that, the effect would fade, and everything would go back to normal. Alan wasn't a mad scientist or an evil man. He had developed this serum for scientific research, to understand emotions, to help people who had lost their ability to love. But deep inside, he also wanted to prove something. That love was just chemistry, a reaction in the brain. Tonight, he would test it. But he needed a subject. And he had one. In the corner of the lab, behind a thick glass wall, sat Zyra. She was no ordinary woman. She was an alien, a soldier from the Orcs Empire, a race known for their strength and intelligence. Earth had captured her after a failed invasion attempt, and now she was a prisoner. She had cold, golden eyes, sharp features, and dark blue skin. She never smiled. She never spoke unless necessary. She had been locked away for months, refusing to share any information. But now, Alan had a plan. He walked toward the glass wall and pressed a button. "Zyra," he said, his voice calm. "I need your help." She looked at him with disgust. "I will never help a human." Alan sighed. He expected that. So without another word, he pressed a second button. The room Zyra was in filled with sleeping gas. Within seconds, she collapsed. Alan stepped inside, carefully injected the serum into her arm, and waited. His heart pounded. Would it work? Minutes passed. Zyra's breathing became steady. Then her golden eyes fluttered open. But something was different. She looked at Alan, and for the first time, she smiled. Alan took a step back. He had never seen her smile before. "Alan," Zyra whispered. Her voice, once filled with hatred, was now soft and warm. Alan's stomach twisted. The serum worked. Zyra sat up, her eyes locked on him. I feel something strange." Alan cleared his throat. "It's just a temporary reaction. It will wear off in 72 hours. Zyra stood up and walked toward him. Alan wanted to move back, but something about her gaze froze him in place. "You are amazing," Zyra whispered. Alan swallowed hard. "You don't mean that." "It's the serum." She reached out, gently touching his face. Her touch was warm, completely different from the warrior who once swore to destroy humans. "I never noticed before," Zyra said softly, "but you are special." Alan's hands clenched into fists. This was wrong. She wasn't supposed to be like this. This was just a test. But for the next few hours, Zyra didn't leave his side. She followed him around the lab, watched him with admiration, and hung on to every word he said. At first, Alan found it amusing. Then it became uncomfortable. Then it became terrifying. Because as time passed, the effect wasn't fading. By morning, Zyra's devotion had only grown stronger. She held his hands, whispered about how she would protect him from anyone who tried to hurt him. She destroyed the security cameras in the lab, saying she didn't want anyone else watching him. Alan panicked. He ran back to his computer, checking his formula. Had he made a mistake? The serum was only supposed to last 3 days. But Zyra's brain scans told a different story. The changes in her mind were permanent. Alan's throat went dry. He had created something dangerous. This wasn't love. This was obsession. Just then, an alarm blared in the lab. Alan turned toward the screen, and his blood ran cold. A Orcs warship was approaching Earth. They were coming for Zyra. And if they found out what he had done, they would kill him. A love that shouldn't exist. Alan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his pulse pounding in his ears. The data on his screen didn't make sense. The love serum had been designed to wear off after 72 hours, but Zyra's brain scan showed no sign of reversal. This shouldn't be happening. He glanced up. Zara was still watching him, golden eyes filled with something unnatural, something too intense. Alan swallowed hard. She wasn't just under the effects of the serum. She was changed. And now, she was his problem. The problem that won't fade. Alan tried to act normal, but his mind was racing. He had to reverse the effects before things got worse. "Zira," he said cautiously, "how do you feel?" She smiled, stepping closer. "I feel perfect," she whispered. "I have never felt this way before. It is beautiful." Her voice was gentle, almost dreamy, completely different from the ruthless warrior she had been before. Alan took a step back. "And what do you remember? Do you remember being a soldier?" Zara tilted her head. Of course. Alan felt a small spark of hope. If she remembered her past, maybe he could break through the serum's effects. But then she continued, "I remember hating you." Her fingers brushed his cheek, a strange mix of affection and regret in her eyes. "But I was wrong. You are my purpose now." Alan's stomach twisted. This wasn't real. This wasn't Zira's true self. This was the serum talking. He had to fix this. But before he could say another word, a loud alarm blared through the lab. Alan spun toward his computer screen, and his heart stopped. A Verex warship had entered Earth's orbit. They had found her. The hunt begins. Alan rushed to the control panel and scanned the ship's frequency. They weren't attacking, yet. The Verex were likely scanning the planet, searching for Zira's signal. Alan turned to her, heart pounding. "Zira, listen to me. Your people are looking for you. If they find you, they'll—" "I do not care," Zira interrupted, her golden eyes burning with devotion. "I only care about you." Alan clenched his jaw. She didn't understand the danger. The Verex weren't coming to rescue her. They were coming to erase whatever had been done to their soldier. And if they found out that a human had altered her mind, they would destroy him. Alan ran to his desk, flipping through vials and papers. He had to find a way to reverse the serum before it was too late. But before he could grab a sample, Zira's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Alan," she whispered, her grip like iron. He flinched. He had forgotten how strong she was. "You don't need to fix anything," she said softly. "I am perfect like this." Alan's throat went dry. "Let go, Zira." She didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what you're trying to do. You want to take this away from me, but I won't let you." Alan's chest tightened. This was bad. Zira wasn't just under the influence of the serum anymore. She was protecting it. Before he could react, she moved in a blur, faster than any human could see, and smashed the vials of the remaining serum. Alan's eyes widened in horror. She had just destroyed the only samples that could help reverse this. Zira's gaze was soft, but there was something dangerous behind it. "Now, no one can take me away from you." Alan took a shaky breath. He was trapped. Not just with Zira, but with the version of Zira he had created. Nowhere left to hide. A loud boom shook the lab. The ship was getting closer. Alan grabbed Zira's shoulders. "Zira, if they find you like this, they will erase you. They will take you apart piece by piece to understand what happened." Zira smiled. "Then let them try." Alan cursed under his breath. He needed to get her out of here. Without another word, he grabbed a shock injector from his desk and pressed it against her neck. Zira's eyes widened. "Alan." Click. A pulse of energy surged through her body. Her grip on his wrist loosened, and within seconds she collapsed. Alan caught her before she hit the ground, his breathing ragged. She wasn't dead, just stunned. It would give him just enough time to escape. He grabbed a small data chip containing his research, threw on his jacket, and hoisted Zira onto his shoulder. As he ran toward the underground exit, a robotic voice echoed through the lab's speakers. "Verex forces detected. Evacuation recommended." Alan gritted his teeth. No kidding. He had minutes before the Verex landed. Minutes before they realized what he had done. Minutes before everything fell apart. And worse, he had no idea how to fix Zyra, or if she even wanted to be fixed. The hunt begins. Alan bolted through the underground tunnels, carrying Zyra's unconscious body over his shoulder. The corridors were tight and dimly lit, but he moved with desperation, his breath loud and ragged. Above ground, the Verex warship hovered ominously in Earth's atmosphere, its glowing engines illuminating the night sky. The alien Empire's soldiers were no strangers to Earth's terrain, and if they found him, there would be no negotiation, just cold, efficient elimination. Alan's mind raced. How did it come to this? Just 2 days ago, Zyra was a prisoner of war, locked away behind reinforced glass. He had been a scientist, not a fugitive. But now, with her mind permanently altered by his experimental serum, she was no longer a soldier loyal to her empire. She was something else, something dangerous. As he turned a corner in the tunnel, a faint rumble overhead made him freeze. He pressed himself against the cold, metal wall, holding his breath. The sound of heavy boots echoed above. A Verex search team. They were getting closer. Alan cursed silently. He needed to keep moving, but he couldn't risk making noise. Zyra was still out cold from the stun injector, her weight dragging on his shoulder. It wouldn't be long before she woke up, and when she did, Alan wasn't sure what to expect. She wasn't the Zyra he had known. Zyra's awakening. Finally, Alan reached an abandoned storage room deep underground. He placed Zyra on a makeshift cot, his hands shaking as he worked. He sealed the entrance, using a small welding torch to create a temporary barrier. It wouldn't hold the Verex soldiers for long, but it might buy him time. As he turned back to Zyra, she stirred. Her golden eyes blinked open, and Alan took a cautious step back. Alan. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of confusion. Where are we? We're safe, he said quickly. For now. She tried to sit up, wincing. I feel strange. Alan hesitated. Do you remember what happened? Zyra's gaze locked onto him, and for a brief moment, he thought she looked like her old self, stern, calculating, and sharp. But then her expression softened, her lips curving into a small smile. Yes, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I remember you saved me. Alan's stomach twisted. This wasn't real. This was still the serum's effect. The Verex closed in. A loud metallic clang echoed through the tunnels. Alan's head snapped toward the door. The Verex soldiers were coming. Their equipment would cut through his makeshift seal in minutes. He turned back to Zyra. We need to leave. Right now. Zyra frowned. But why? We're together. Isn't that enough? No, Alan snapped, more forcefully than he intended. They're coming for us. They're going to kill me And what? Zyra stood up slowly, her golden eyes narrowing. They wouldn't dare harm me. I am one of them. Her words were calm, but there was an undertone of danger. Alan could feel it. She wasn't the cold, ruthless soldier she used to be. She wasn't entirely herself, either. They're coming to erase what I did to you, Alan said, his voice quiet now. They'll take you apart to figure out what happened. Zyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Then I'll kill them before they can. Alan stepped back, shaking his head. No more killing. A heavy thud against the sealed door made them both turn. The Verex were almost through. Alan grabbed his pack, slinging it over his shoulder. Zyra, he said firmly, if we don't leave now, we're both dead. The escape. Zyra hesitated, then gave a small nod. Fine, but I'm not leaving your side. Alan pushed open a hidden panel, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. It was a tight fit, but it would lead them closer to the surface, and hopefully, away from the Verex. As they climbed, the walls felt like they were closing in. Alan's breathing was labored, and every sound seemed deafening. Above them, the faint rumble of alien machinery echoed, reminding him how close the Vareks were. "Alan," Zyra said softly behind him. "What? You're sweating." He paused, looking back at her. She was smiling again, soft, almost sweet. It made him shiver. "We'll get through this," she added, her voice gentle. Alan clenched his jaw. This wasn't her. This wasn't real. Nowhere to hide. When they finally emerged onto the surface, Alan squinted against the harsh moonlight. The landscape was barren, a stretch of rocky plains with nowhere to hide. The Vareks warship loomed in the distance, a massive shadow against the stars. Zyra stepped forward, scanning the horizon. "I'll protect you," she said, her tone almost reassuring. Alan wanted to believe her. For a moment, he thought maybe, just maybe, she could be trusted. Then, a faint hum filled the air. Alan froze. A Varek scout drone hovered in the distance, its bright lights sweeping the terrain. Alan grabbed Zyra's arm. "We have to move. Now." But she didn't flinch. Instead, she stared at the drone, her eyes narrowing. "I'll handle it," she said simply. Before Alan could stop her, she stepped out into the open. Her body tensed, her movements fluid and calculated. The warrior in her had never truly left. The drone's light focused on her, and a sharp beep sounded. It had seen her, and now it would summon the others. "Zyra, get back here," Alan hissed. But she ignored him. She was walking straight toward it, her hands at her sides, her posture calm. Alan's heart pounded as the drone turned, its energy weapon charging. "Zyra." She moved in a flash, faster than he could see, and ripped the drone apart with her bare hands. Alan stared in disbelief. She turned back to him, tossing the drone's shattered pieces aside. "See," she said, smiling again. "No one will hurt you." Alan's mind was spinning. She was protecting him, but at what cost? In the distance, more drones appeared. The Vareks weren't going to give up. They had no time, and Alan had no idea how to save her, or himself. Captured by the enemy. The harsh light of the interrogation chamber made it impossible for Alan to tell how long he'd been awake. He squinted, head pounding, wrists aching from the restraints pinning him to a cold metal chair. Somewhere beyond the thick, steel door, he heard the rhythmic clatter of heavy boots and the low murmur of alien voices. The Vareks had him, and they weren't letting go. He had failed. They had been so close to escaping. Just one more ridge, one more stolen vehicle, and they might have disappeared into Earth's vast wilderness. But Zyra's fierce devotion had made her reckless. She'd turned to fight when she should have fled. And that split-second decision had cost them everything. Alan took a shaky breath, trying to push away the memory. It wouldn't do any good to replay it now. What mattered was figuring out what the Vareks were going to do next, and how he could stop them. A familiar voice. The door hissed open, and Alan tensed. A tall Vareks officer stepped into the chamber, his crystalline blue armor glinting under the bright light. His angular face was sharp, cold, and utterly unreadable. Alan had seen this one before. Commander Rael, one of the Vareks military's most respected leaders. Rael didn't speak at first. He simply stared down at Alan with an air of quiet menace. Behind him, a pair of guards dragged Zyra into the room. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, and her golden eyes burned with defiance. "Alan Reed," Rael said finally, his voice smooth and deliberate. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble." Alan clenched his jaw. "I didn't do anything to you." Rael raised an eyebrow. "No, you took our officer. You altered her mind. You turned her into whatever she is now." He leaned closer, his tone sharper. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Alan forced himself to stay calm. "I was trying to help her." "Help her?" Rael's lips curled into a humorless smile. "You poisoned her. You turned her against her own people. This isn't love. This is a weapon." Alan's stomach twisted. He hadn't meant for it to be like this. But he couldn't back down now. I didn't know it would be permanent. I never meant to hurt her. Rael's smile vanished. He gestured to the guards, who stepped forward and yanked Zyra upright. You see, Mr. Reed, we can't have one of our own compromised like this. We can't let you spread this infection. Wait, Alan said quickly, his voice rising. I can fix it. I can reverse what I did. Zyra's eyes snapped at him. You can't, she said sharply. Don't even try. I'm not going back to the way I was. Rael ignored her, his focus on Alan. Oh, we'll find out if you can fix it. If not, we'll take your research. We'll find a way to reverse it ourselves. You won't get anywhere without my help, Alan said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. And if you hurt her, you'll lose the only chance you have at finding out how this works. Rael studied him for a moment, then nodded to the guards. They dragged Zyra toward the door. Wait, Alan shouted, struggling against his restraints. Don't hurt her. Rael glanced back, his expression unreadable. Hurt her? No, Mr. Reed. We're not going to hurt her. We're going to recondition her, wipe her mind clean. And once we're done, she'll be the perfect soldier again. The perfect Verex officer. Alan felt his blood run cold. You can't do that. Rael's eyes narrowed. You should hope we can, Mr. Reed. Because if we can't, then you'll have a much bigger problem on your hands. The choice. When the guards pulled Zyra through the doorway, she twisted in their grip, her golden eyes blazing with fury. Alan, she shouted, don't let them take me. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off her voice. Alan was left alone in the silence, his thoughts spinning. This was it. He had to act. He had to find a way to stop them from erasing her mind, to save her, even if she didn't want to be saved. Because no matter what had happened between them, no matter how strange and unnatural their bond was, he couldn't just let her be wiped away. But there was one problem. He didn't know if he could trust himself. A dangerous alliance. Alan's cell was silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's power systems vibrating through the walls. Hours, or maybe days, had passed since the Verex soldiers dragged Zyra out of the room. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Was she still herself? Were they already rewriting her mind? He paced the small chamber, his thoughts racing. He'd spent his life believing in science, in the idea that emotions and desires could be reduced to simple chemistry. The serum was supposed to prove that love wasn't magic. It was just molecules and neural signals. Now, as he thought of Zyra's golden eyes burning with devotion, he wasn't so sure. A glimmer of hope. The heavy door slid open, and Alan instinctively stepped back. Two guards entered, their sleek, crystalline armor catching the light. Between them stood an unexpected figure, a human woman wearing a sleek black jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the aliens flanking her. Her dark hair was cut short, her expression sharp, and her eyes had a calculating glint. She stepped inside, dismissing the guards with a wave. The door closed, sealing them in together. Dr. Reed, she said, her voice smooth. You've caused quite the stir. Alan stared at her, his confusion clear. Who are you? Agent Dahl, she replied. I'm with the Interplanetary Research Directorate. She smirked faintly. Think of me as your last chance. Alan frowned. Why are you working with the Verex? Because the Verex have something we need, she said. And they think you do too. Her words sent a chill through him. You mean the serum? She nodded. You developed something extraordinary, Alan. Something that could change everything. But you made a mistake. You let it fall into the wrong hands. I didn't mean for this to happen, Alan said, his voice rising. I didn't know it would take over her mind. I just wanted to prove a point. Dahl cut him off, her gaze hardening. Well, congratulations. You've done more than prove a point. You've created a weapon that everyone wants. Earth, the Verex, anyone with the resources to replicate it. They're all willing to pay any price to get their hands on it. Alan clenched his fists. It's not a weapon. It is now, Dahl said firmly. And if you don't help me, the Verrex will either kill you or lock you away forever. They'll pick apart your research, reverse engineer it, and then no one will be safe. The Alliance. Alan eyed her warily. Why should I trust you? You don't have a choice, Dahl said bluntly. I'm offering you a way out. I can get you off this ship. I can get Zira back, before they erase her completely, but only if you work with me. The mention of Zira made him pause. Alan knew he couldn't abandon her, no matter how dangerous she had become. What's your plan? He asked. Dahl stepped closer, lowering her voice. I've got access to their systems. I can guide you to where they're holding her. But once we're out, you'll have to give me everything. The formula, the data, the notes, everything you know about the serum. Alan hesitated. Handing over his research could unleash consequences he couldn't control. But if he didn't act now, Zira would be lost forever. Fine, he said reluctantly. But if you betray me. Dahl raised a hand, cutting him off again. Spare me the threats. Let's just get out of here alive. The breakout. Within minutes, Dahl had him out of the cell. Her device overrode the ship's security locks, and she led him through the maze of dimly lit corridors. Alan stayed close behind, his heart pounding as they dodged patrolling Verrex guards. When they reached the detention wing, Dahl handed him a small cylindrical device. EMP disruptor, she said. It'll knock out their surveillance long enough for you to find her. What about you? He asked. I'll be buying you time, she said simply. Go. Alan didn't waste a second. He slipped into the wing and found Zira's holding cell. She was strapped to a high-tech restraint chair, her head tilted back, her eyes closed. Zira, Alan whispered, rushing to her side. Her golden eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they looked blank, empty. Alan's stomach clenched, but then she blinked again, and a faint spark of recognition returned. Alan, she said, her voice weak. I'm here, he said quickly, working on the restraints. I'm getting you out. She frowned. What are you doing? They'll kill you. They'll kill us both if we stay, Alan muttered. We're leaving. A dangerous escape. As he freed her, the ship's alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed along the walls, and the steady hum of engines grew louder. Alan helped Zira to her feet, her movements sluggish but growing stronger with each step. They didn't get far before a group of Verrex guards appeared, weapons drawn. Zira's golden eyes narrowed, and she stepped in front of Alan, raising her hands. Wait, Alan said sharply. You don't have to. But before he could finish, Zira moved. In a blur of motion, she disarmed the nearest guard, knocking him unconscious. She spun, using the fallen weapon to disable the others with precision and speed. Within seconds, the corridor was clear. Alan stared at her, his chest heaving. I thought you were too weak to fight. Zira turned to him, her expression unreadable. I'll always protect you, she said simply. He didn't know what to say to that. As they ran toward the extraction point Dahl had marked on his map, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just fleeing the Verrex. He was running out of time to figure out if Zira's devotion was something he could ever undo, or if he even wanted to. The final betrayal. The escape was going too smoothly. Alan could feel it in his gut. Something was about to go very, very wrong. As he and Zira ducked into the lower maintenance decks, weaving through narrow, dimly lit corridors, he glanced at her. She was moving with precision again, her strength seemingly restored after the reconditioning attempt. Yet her golden eyes still burned with that unnatural devotion. He couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine. Ahead of them, Dahl appeared, stepping out from a maintenance hatch. She had a faint smirk on her face, her black jumpsuit still spotless despite the chaos. Well done, she said, giving Alan an approving nod. I was beginning to wonder if you'd actually make it. Alan frowned. We're not out yet. She held up a small device, one that Alan recognized instantly. It was the memory backup module from the Varix reconditioning chamber, the same one they had planned to use on Zura. What's that? Alan asked, his voice guarded. Dahl's smirk grew. Insurance, in case you decide to double-cross me. A twisted bargain. Zura stepped closer to Dahl, her golden eyes narrowing. He won't double-cross you, she said firmly. He's good. Dahl laughed softly. Sure he is, but good intentions only get you so far, especially when you've got something as valuable as that serum formula. Alan glared at her. I thought you said we were working together. We are, Dahl said smoothly. I just like to keep my options open. That's why I've made a little arrangement. You hand over your full research, every formula, every note, and I'll let you and Zyra go free. No more running. I'll even erase your records from the Directorate's database. Alan's chest tightened. And if I don't? Dahl's smile faded. Then I hand this memory module over to the Varix. They'll get exactly what they need to make more of you. Alan's mind raced. If the Varix got their hands on the memory module, they could reverse engineer the serum. They'd have the ability to control emotions on a massive scale, turning entire populations into puppets. That wasn't just dangerous, it was catastrophic. You're bluffing, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Dahl's expression darkened. Am I? Zura's unwavering devotion. As Alan stood there, trying to calculate his next move, Zyra turned to him. Her golden eyes softened, filled with the same devotion that had unsettled him from the beginning. Alan, she said quietly, if you give her what she wants, we'll be safe. I'll protect you, no matter what. Alan stared at her, his heart twisting. Zyra's trust was absolute, an unshakable bond created by his own mistake. Yet it wasn't real. It was a chemical illusion, a side effect of his reckless experiment. He knew that. He'd always known that, but hearing her say it, seeing the sincerity in her gaze, made him hesitate. Zyra, he began, but the words caught in his throat. Dahl, meanwhile, tapped the memory module against her palm. Tick-tock. Read. Make a choice. A hard decision. Alan's hands clenched into fists. He had the formula stored in his head. Years of work, calculations, trial and error experiments. He could hand it over to Dahl and hope she kept her word, but that would mean giving up control, trusting that she wouldn't turn it into the very weapon she accused him of making. Or he could refuse and risk losing Zyra forever. He thought of the Varix soldiers, their cold, efficient precision. If they got the serum, they'd have a tool to dominate entire species, entire worlds. He couldn't let that happen. But could he live with the alternative? Could he live knowing he doomed Zyra to a lifetime of being controlled by a serum that was never meant to last? Could he live knowing that he might never undo the damage he'd done to her? The weight of it all pressed down on him. Every decision he'd made since creating the serum had been a gamble, and every gamble had only made things worse. Alan, Zyra said softly, stepping closer. Trust me, whatever you choose, I'll stand by you. Alan's heart ached. If only she could understand how much he wished she didn't feel that way. If only she could see what he'd done to her and hate him for it. But she couldn't. The serum had taken that choice from her. Finally, he took a deep breath and made his choice. Love or freedom. Alan wasn't sure how he expected the antidote to work, but as he watched Zyra wake up on the medical cot in the abandoned safe house, he felt a surge of both hope and fear. She blinked a few times, her golden eyes no longer glowing with that unnatural intensity. For the first time in days, she looked normal. Her posture was relaxed, her expression neutral, neither the cold warrior nor the obsessive devotee he had come to know. Alan, she said quietly, her voice steady. Where are we? Her tone sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't laced with the syrupy adoration that had defined her every word since the serum took hold. This was her natural voice, sharp and direct, but not hostile. She was herself again, or at least he hoped so. "We're safe," Alan replied, trying to keep his tone calm. "For now." Zira sat up slowly, rubbing her wrists. "Safe? From who?" Alan hesitated. "The Vareks were after us. I was trying to fix something that went wrong." Zira's sharp gaze turned on him. "Fix something," she repeated. There was no warmth in her tone, but no anger either. She seemed to be taking in the information, processing it like she would any other battlefield report. "Yes," Alan said, swallowing hard. I made a mistake. I did something to you. And I'm sorry." Her head tilted slightly, her dark blue face unreadable. What kind of mistake? Alan's stomach twisted. How could he explain? How could he possibly tell her that he'd meddled with her mind, that he'd made her feel things she'd never chosen, that she had been in love, or what looked like love, only because of a serum he'd created, that it was never real? "I created a serum," he admitted, his voice shaky. "It was supposed to be temporary. It made you care about me. But it went wrong. It became permanent." Zira stared at him for a long moment. Her silence was unbearable. Then finally she asked, "How long was I affected?" Alan winced. "Several days." Her golden eyes narrowed. "And in that time, what did I do?" You protected me," Alan said quickly. "You kept me alive. You." He stopped himself, realizing how hollow his words sounded. "You weren't yourself." Zira's hands clenched into fists. "You manipulated my mind, my feelings. You robbed me of my own will." Alan nodded, guilt flooding him. "Yes, and I'm sorry. That's why I worked so hard to undo it." "Undo it," Zira said, her voice cold. "And what am I now? Am I truly free of this serum?" "I think so," Alan said. "The antidote should have neutralized the changes. You should be." He stopped himself again, realizing he didn't know for certain. I hope you're free." Zira's eyes bore into him. "You hope?" "I did everything I could," Alan said. I just want you to have your mind back. Your choices back." Zira rose from the cot, standing tall and imposing. Even without the serum's effects, her presence was intimidating. "You think you can make it right by fixing the mistake after the damage is done. You think that erases what you did." Alan looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "No, it doesn't erase anything. I know that. But I had to try." Zira studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a long breath. "I suppose I should kill you for what you did. That's what the old me would have done." Alan's heart skipped a beat. He braced himself, expecting a blow that never came. "But I won't," Zira continued. "You gave me back my mind. That doesn't absolve you, but it's enough that I don't see the point in killing you. Not now." Alan dared to glance at her. "What are you going to do?" She turned away, her gaze fixed on the small, dirty window of the safe house. "I don't know. I've spent the last few days as a puppet, driven by something I didn't understand. Now that I'm free, I have to decide for myself." Alan wanted to say something, to try to make things right, but he knew he had no right to ask for forgiveness. Zira was her own person now. What she did next wasn't his decision to make. After a long silence, Zira spoke again. "You should leave. The Vareks won't stop hunting me, and they won't stop hunting you either." Alan hesitated. "What about you?" Zira turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "I'll survive. I always do." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the answer he deserved. Alan nodded slowly. "Good luck, Zira." She didn't respond, and Alan took that as his cue to leave. As he stepped out into the night, he felt the weight of what he had done settle heavily on his shoulders. He had given her freedom, but he couldn't give her back the time she'd lost. That was something no antidote could fix. And as he walked away, he realized that perhaps the real punishment wasn't what she might have done to him. It was knowing that he had to live with the consequences of his actions, and that Zaira had to live with them, too.